Hello everyone and welcome to the IELTS multi-step program. My name is Lanre Yusuf, your usual anchor throughout the duration of this program. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to all of our viewers, all of our subscribers who have been watching and giving us feedback on how the content that we've been sharing has been really helpful for them in their IELTS success story. The feedback you give to us allows us to revamp our program and to also touch on the areas that you find most difficult, that you find most challenging, so that other people who are preparing for the test can benefit from your own mistakes or from your own pitfalls. One of the most significant areas that people give a lot of complaints about is the speaking test, and this is quite surprising for us here at our studios. We consider the speaking test to be one of the easiest areas to pass in the IELTS. However, there's some last minute checkup that people want to get when they want to do the speaking test. What I mean last minute checkup, these are the tips that you want to hear an hour, 2 hours, 24 hours, or even a week before your speaking test. And that's what I'm going to be sharing today. So today we're going to be dealing with 10 essential tips that you should know 3 days before your test. The 3 days before your test could also be extended to 3 months before your test, 3 weeks before your test. And it could also be just a whole year before your test. However these tips come, the duration with which you will use them is dependent on your own level of preparation. Without further ado, let's jump right into this video. The first and most important tip that you need to know about the speaking test is this. You need to practice speaking English. Now, this is a very funny tip that a lot of people disregard, and I'd like to please explain this a bit. Now, English language has different variants. We have the formal official English language that we speak in our places of work, at our schools, and we have the pidgin English that we speak with probably on the street. And we have the hybrid kind of English that we speak with our friends, which is quite informal. A lot of people are used to the informal English language that they speak, and before they write the speaking test, before they go for the speaking test, they do not find any way to put themselves in the situation or context where they need to use official or academic or formal English. And this is a problem, which is why a lot of test takers get into the exam hall and they sort of revert back into their informal state. So you have someone speaking on the day of the speaking test and is going as in, I think you know, like, and they keep on saying like, which are speech fillers that are commonly used during informal speech. As a matter of importance, you need to find at least an hour or 2 hours of every day in the 3 days before you take the speaking test to practice speaking formal or official English language with someone who can serve as an accountability partner for you. This could either be a tutor, it could either be a friend who is committed to your success, it could either be your spouse or a partner, or it could either be your study partner. Whatever you do, you need to find someone who puts you on your toes, who is able to assess your speaking competence before you do the test. If you do not have access to this, one thing that you can do is to ensure that you put yourself in situations where you need to use English language as formally as possible. This context include speaking at work, making presentations at work, making presentations in class if you're a student, or even just generally gisting with your friend but trying to elevate the quality of your language. This is a very important tip that you need to do. Remember, success in the IELTS is really predicated on how much you practice, and practicing the speaking needs you to put yourself in that same exam context. The second tip that we're going to be looking at today is this. There are no right or wrong answers in the IELTS speaking test. This also applies for the IELTS writing test. As much as I've said this over and over in all of the videos, people seem not to get this. There are no right or wrong answers in the IELTS speaking test. A classic example of a question that you could get in the IELTS speaking test is this. So a topic, smile. Smile is a topic. So one of the questions under smile in part 1 is who smiles more, men or women? Do men smile more than women, or do women smile more than men? Or who smiles more between men and women? Now that's a question that doesn't have a right answer, nor does it have a wrong answer. All it needs you to do is to give your own opinion. If you say, oh, I believe that men smile more because they are actually quite hard, their nature is actually quite hard and harsh, so they need to smile to take off the edge. Oh, I believe that women smile more because they need to look beautiful, or they like to look beautiful and a smile makes you beautiful. Whichever one of those two answers would be correct. What the examiner would be interested in is how I convey my message, not in the content of what I'm saying. Trust me, any reason I give for men smiling more will be valid or relevant in the IELTS as long as it is grammatically correct and it makes sense in the context of the question. Any reason that I give for women being the sex that smiles more or being the gender that smiles more will be correct as long as it is coherent and it is logically arranged. What the examiner is more concerned about are what are the words that I'm using to convey my message. How did I arrange the words? How did I order the words? Am I fluent? Did I pronounce the words correctly? Did I use the correct tenses in conveying my message? That is the focus of the IELTS. That is what makes your answer right or wrong, not the content of your answer. It's very important for us to note this before we go into the speaking test, so that we don't get caught up in that moment of angst where we're thinking that we're second guessing our answers and we're already thinking that we have the wrong answer for a question that we believe requires in-depth knowledge or intelligence. The third tip follows right on the heels of that, and it is that the IELTS questions, the IELTS answers in the speaking test are based solely on your opinion. Now, there's a slight caveat here. The part 1 questions, there are 3 parts in the speaking test, as we all know. The part 1 is questions that are derived from a general context and that are based on your personal experience. What do I mean by this? Most of the information that most of the illustration, most of the examples that you're going to use to extend your answer in the part 1 are going to be based on things that you have personally experienced, because the questions are also fashioned along that line. Do you smile a lot? When was the last time you smiled? When was the last time you were in a place when was the last time you were in a place where a lot of people were smiling? All of these questions have a you tag attached to them. Whereas in part 3, the question will be much more general context. There will be much more general context where they are asking for what the general populace or what a wider section of society thinks or feels about a particular concept. Okay? So the question about who do you think smiles more, men or women, will be a part 3 question, while the question about when was the last time you were in a place where people had to smile a lot will be a part 1 question. Whichever part of the test the questions come from, they are all based on your opinions, which means that the only thing that would make them either correct or incorrect or valid or invalid will be the reasons that you use to back up your opinion or the examples that you use to illustrate or buttress your point. It is very important that we keep it at the back of our mind immediately before we step into the exam hall, or even 3 days before we get into the exam hall. Very, very important that we note this. The next tip that I have for us here, which will be the first tip, is this. Avoid repeating words used in the examiner's question. Avoid repeating words used in the examiner's question. This is something that I have said over and over and over again, and I discovered that a lot of our subscribers, a lot of our audience who watch our videos, who phone into the studio to request for a one-on-one speaking test with us, still make that mistake. And when I tell them that this is the score that they have and this is what accounts for that reduction in their score, they act surprised. Please note this, the IELTS multi-step program is predicated on the power of synonyms and paraphrasing. Under no circumstance should you throw up that opportunity to display a level of high competence in your vocabulary usage, which using synonyms gives to you. Anytime you're asked a question, anytime you're given a sentence, anytime you're given a piece of information and you try as much as possible to rephrase it by either changing a word that is synonym or by changing the whole sentence, by paraphrasing the whole sentence, what you're doing is two things. The first thing you're doing is that you're clearly indicating to the examiner that you understand the question. If I have digested the question, I should be able to replicate it or repeat it in my own words to show that I have understood the question. The second thing that you're doing is that automatically you're getting high marks for vocabulary usage. Lexical resource is one of the most important criteria that is used in the IELTS to assess your communicative competence. If I can be asked a question that says, what are the advantages of shooting videos? And my response says, there are many benefits to shooting videos, but the most important one is that you look good. Just by changing the word advantages to benefits, I am already a step higher than someone who goes ahead to repeat the question. Another thing that repeating the question does is that it sort of waters down the quality of your responses. It starts to sound as if you're parroting what the examiner is saying, and that, in a way, can make you sound like a primary school student. It's like you're just repeating, you're chanting nursery rhymes. So the examiner says, what is the most interesting thing about your city? And you go, the most interesting thing about my city is that, no. What is the most interesting thing about your city could be answered by saying, my city has a lot of amazing places, but I think the most engaging one or the most intriguing one would be this. Please, as much as possible, endeavor to do what? To change words in the question, especially if you are going to be one of those people who repeats questions before they give their answers. What do I mean by that? There are some people who cannot give a direct answer to a question without repeating the question first. And that's not such a bad thing if you do what? If you change some words, if you rephrase the question that you are repeating. If you do not repeat questions before you answer, good for you. Still, as much as possible, try to change some keywords in the question that has been given to you in your response. This is a very, very valid tip that can automatically boost your performance in the speaking test and ensure that you get a desired score that you want in the IELTS test. The next tip that we're going to look at is one that has been overflogged, and I think that we just need to repeat it again. Speak clearly. Speak clearly. This refers to you enunciating your words. I'll take this back to an illustration that I will be drawn from the listening test. In the listening test of the IELTS, you will discover that the part 1 and the part 2, the pace is a little bit slower. The words are pronounced a little bit much more clearly than what you get in part 3 and part 4. By the time you get to the part 3 and part 4 of the listening test, there's an increase in the pace. There's an increase, there's less disregard for clear enunciation. The words are just sort of just jumbled together, and there's no desire by the speakers to allow you to carry you along or to ensure that you can hear each word clearly. Your own model of speaking for the speaking test would be what you hear in your part 1 and the part 2 of the speaking test. In fact, if you listen to this part 2 of the listening test, what you usually have is a monologue. You have one person giving a tour, maybe a tour guide, or you have a manager giving a job description. You would discover that at this point in time, there is a very concerted effort to ensure that you hear the words clearly. Any confusing bit of information in the part 2 of the IELTS usually is not from the fact that you can't hear the words. It's usually from the fact that the words that are used might actually be quite confusing to decipher or interpret. But you would not complain of not hearing the words. You are meant to replicate this in your speaking test. Speak as clearly as possible. I've had situations where test takers start their response at this pitch, and as they go on, it starts going and it starts going down, and I wonder, Why are you reducing the volume of your voice when you are still in the midst of a particular sentence? Why are you trying to speak with an American accent that has you speaking so fast that each of your words cannot be clearly enunciated, that we cannot even clearly hear them? Do not sacrifice your success on the altar of sounding woke or sounding very, of sounding very foreign. As much as possible, speaking clearly is a much more important step to success than speaking fancy. This is something that a lot of test takers still disregard, and I wonder why, and I wonder how they have the impression or have this idea that if they speak like a native English speaker, when I say speak like a native English speaker, I mean the way they sound, that would get them higher scores. No. Remember, the speaking examiner is put there to facilitate the whole session that would, in such a way that would enable you to give the best display of your speaking competence. The questions that they ask you are meant to guide you into giving the best performance that you can give. Even when they interrupt you, it is because they've gotten enough material to assess your communicative competence with. Not because they are wicked or not because you just want to just cut your flow. So, everything that the speaking examiner does is designed to allow you to shine. You need to take advantage of that opportunity given by speaking as clearly as possible. The IELTS speaking test is not a place to go and to revert into your shell. No, you need to be as boisterous, you need to be as verbose, you need to be as productive as possible in the speaking test. Ensure that all the words that you're going to use are clearly enunciated in the speaking test. The next tip that we have here, and that will be tip number 6. Remember, we're doing 10 tips, essential tips that you need to know before you step into this hall for the speaking test. Number 6 tip is this: answer in as much detail as possible. Answer in as much detail as possible. I'll take that once again. Answer in as much detail as possible. A lot of times, people answer the IELTS questions with monosyllables. People give short responses to questions in the IELTS, and their common excuse is, I don't know so much about that question. No, no, no. This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. The IELTS speaking test is simply that, a test of your speaking competence. The only way that I can assess, the only way that I can judge if you can speak well or not is if you actually do speak and produce information. So if your responses are short, if your responses are one-word responses, two-word responses, there's no way that I'm going to have enough material to assess your communicative competence. That way, speaking with as much detail as possible is one surefire way of getting good points in the IELTS speaking test. Now, to the second part of that tip, which is the complaint that people give, and the most frequent excuse is, Mr. Lanre, I really do not know what to say about that question. That is why my answer was just restricted to a yes, or to a no, or to a maybe, or to a I don't know. The easy format for extending your answers in the IELTS speaking test is as follows. Every time you make a claim, you share an opinion, or you share a view in the IELTS. Those are the 3 things that you're going to be doing in the speaking test all through. You're either going to be making a claim, sharing a view, or sharing your opinion. Anytime you do any of the 3, the next logical thing for you to do is to give a reason, or to give reasons why you made that claim, reasons why you hold that view, reasons why you have that opinion. And after you give a reason, or you give reasons, the next thing to do after that is to give examples to illustrate. So your format is opinion, reason, example. View, reason, example. Claim, reason, example. This way, you are at least assured of giving 2 to 3 sentences as response to every question, which automatically ensures that you're giving more detail than you would normally give, and you're giving sufficient detail for the examiner to judge or assess your communicative competence. Answering in as much detail as possible is one surefire way to boost your success chances in the IELTS speaking test. And I would advise you that this is something that you should keep close to heart if you indeed desire to pass in the IELTS. Okay? The next tip, and this has to do with grammar, and I'm only going to give just one grammar tip throughout the whole of this 10 essential tips that you need for the speaking test. Use the correct verb in terms of tense and number. Use the correct verb in terms of tense and number, and use the correct noun in terms of number. So the basic tip is tense and number. Use the correct verb in terms of tense and number. What do I mean by that? Did the thing happen in the past? Did it happen now? Or is it happening now? Or will it be happening in the future? Your verb that you're using must indicate any of this. It can either be an ed verb, which is in the past. It can either be a verb that is happening now, which is in the base form. I sleep. That is present. I sleep is habitual. And I will be sleeping. That is future. And I slept. That is in the past. Use the correct verb in terms of tense. Use the correct verb in terms of number. Verbs also carry the plural and singular marker. And this is quite strange for a lot of people. When we hear singular and plural, we usually think of nouns. We don't think of verbs. But hey, there's news for you. Verbs also carry the number marker, which is singular and plural. Example, Lanre goes to school. Lanre goes to school. Goes there is a singular verb, and you would see that it carries S. Now, if it was plural, it would be Lanre and Tenny go to school. Lanre and his brothers go to school. Now, immediately the people in that sentence were more than one, which is plural. The verb also changed also. So this is something we call the subject-verb concord or agreement. Okay, so Lanre and his brothers go to school. Immediately the verb changed to plural, the S was dropped. That's a very important rule. Singular verbs carry S. Plural verbs do not carry S. Whereas singular nouns do not carry S, while plural nouns carry S. It might be quite confusing, but just keep that formula in your head. Singular verbs carry S. Plural verbs do not carry S. Singular nouns do not carry S. Plural nouns carry S. Okay? So it will be the boy goes to school. The boys go to school. That's a very clear example. The boy goes to school. The boys go to school. Very essential so that grammar would not become the crutch that makes you fail the IELTS. Okay? Please, very important. Tip number 8, pronunciation. Tip number 8 is on pronunciation. And this is something that a lot of us overlook. We confuse pronunciation with accent. No, pronunciation isn't accent. I spoke about this earlier when I said you should enunciate your words, you should speak as clearly as possible. This also has to do with pronunciation. Please, as a non-native user of the English language, your pronunciation is going to be colored by your native tongue. There's nothing you can do about that. As a non-native speaker or user of the English language, your pronunciation is going to be colored by your mother tongue. There's nothing you can do about that. So even those who have near native competence will still have some areas, some key areas where their native tongue or their first language still sort of just shows up or sort of shows up in their responses or in their speech. So do not allow yourself to be so worried or bothered about your accent, about your Igbotic accent, about your Yorubaish accent, about your Hausa accent, about your Cameroonian accent, about your Indian accent. No. Your focus should be those words that you're pronouncing, those words that you're using. Are you using them in such a way that they are clearly pronounced? and you're using them in such a way that someone who does not speak your first language will be able to identify that this is an actual English word. Are you using those words in such a way that someone who is not a speaker of your own first language, of your native tongue, will be able to identify that this is an actual English word? Okay? For example, the Arabs and people from the northern part of Nigeria have a problem with the letter P and B. P and B. While the Arabs mix up P with B, so it will be the word swimming pool will be called swimming pool. The word swimming pool will be called swimming pool. For the people from our brothers from the northern part of the country, the letter P is often replaced with letter F, with the sound F. So instead of saying the paper, it could be fafer. Okay, it could be fafer. Now, fafer obviously is the wrong pronunciation. Now, it is the wrong pronunciation. Now, a native English speaker could say paper, paper, with the R at the end sounding, while a typical Nigerian, probably Igbo or Yoruba, will say paper, paper, without the R sounding. But if I say paper, you understand what I'm saying. It is, you can identify the object that I'm calling. Either I say paper or I say paper, you will be able to identify the object that I am mentioning or that I am identifying. That is what I mean by speaking clearly and enunciating your words. I'm not talking about really defective interferences with your language like fafer. Fafer doesn't mean anything, so that would be obviously wrong. So when people talk about pronunciation, I think that illustration sort of explains how important it is and to what extent you can take liberties with your pronunciation. Tip number 9. Use simple, commonly used vocabulary. Use simple, commonly used vocabulary. This is such a bone of contention for a lot of test takers that I cannot just, I marvel at how much we complicate things that do not need to be complicated. The default mode for the average Nigerian is to assume that the bigger the words, the more high sounding, the more advanced the words, the better my communicative competence. But here's news for you. It doesn't mean that. Sometimes people who use the big jaw-breaking words are actually, in essence, not communicating at all. They might actually be saying rubbish. Whereas those who use simple, commonly used words that are used in everyday speech by everybody actually do communicate more effectively and convincingly. Am I saying you should not use big grammar, for lack of a better word? No. Use relevant vocabulary where applicable. Use relevant vocabulary where applicable. Do not go out of your way to look for words that will make you sound more competent, that will make you sound more knowledgeable without adding anything at all to the message you're trying to pass across. Let me give you an example. There's a client of mine who learns the word reiterate. Reiterate. I used that word in one of our classes when we were writing an essay, and I told them that this is a very good word to use when you're writing your tie back in your essay. The tie back is just a sentence that links everything you said in a paragraph to the thesis statement. And I said you can use a statement that says, this simply reiterates the importance of shooting videos. Okay, that's the context that you can use it. So this person goes, oh, I like this word, this big word, I'm going to use this word in the exam. And she notes it down in our notebook and crams the word and says, I'm going to use it. The next time we're having a speaking test, so I go ahead and I ask that question and I say, would you say your hometown is a good place for young people to live? Would you say your hometown is a good place for young people to live? And she goes, I would reiterate that young people, and I'm like, no, you cannot reiterate. When you reiterate, it means that you are re-emphasizing a point that you've made earlier. So there's no point that reiterate would have come up in that her response, because she was just trying to just sound advanced. She was just trying to sound impressive, and that is not the essence of using those advanced vocabulary. If you're going to use much more advanced vocabulary elements, ensure that you know what they mean and ensure that they are relevant to the message that you're trying to pass across, and not just using them because you want to sound impressive, because you want to impress the examiner, or because you feel that it makes you sound better. That is not the essence. If that is the point, if that is the reason why you're going to be using advanced vocabulary, I would advise you to just stick to your commonly used words that would allow you to express yourself convincingly. Remember, the essence in the IELTS speaking test is to say exactly what you mean to say. Say exactly what you mean to say. Use words that convey exactly the points that you're trying to convey. Do not use words that you feel sound like what you think you want to say. As much as possible, this is one of the reasons why a lot of people fail in the IELTS. And, they come out and you ask them, so how was your speaking test? They go, oh, I killed it. I was using so much big words. The examiner was just nodding. And at the end of the day, you check their score. It's a band 6. It's a band 5.5. And then you're wondering, but you told me you did this and that. And then they go, oh, but I did it. Mr. Lanre, I don't know what happened. And then I go, okay, so let's run a practice test for you. Let's just run a review. And then I ask them the questions. And then I see that there's this concerted effort to just impress by using words that are highfalutin words that do not have any bearing at all on the message that they are trying to pass across. Do not be one of these people. Do not fall into this trap. Yes, so one other tip that I want you to note, and this is like the 10th tip, watch the examiner's mouth. Watch the examiner's mouth during the speaking test. And why is this? This is just to improve your chances of being able to decipher what the examiner is saying. If I'm talking to you and you're only listening to me and you cannot see me, you cannot in any way tell me that you have a better chance of understanding what I'm saying as opposed to than someone who can actually see me and actually listen to me too. Visual cues help. I'm looking at the examiner, I'm watching the examiner's mouth. So even if there's a word that I might mishear, that I might think that I didn't hear clearly, if I'm watching the examiner's mouth, I can read your lips. The word lips cannot be pronounced in any other way except lips. If you're watching me, you will not mistake that for nips, because you would see that when I pronounce the word lips, my tongue went to the roof of my mouth and I went lips as opposed to nips that had a much more nasal sound in it. So looking at the examiner's mouth allows you to improve your chances of figuring out what the examiner is saying, especially in the part 3 of the speaking test where the questions are a little bit longer. The questions in part 3 are a little bit longer, so there's a tendency for you to miss out on one or two things in the question, or even forget part of the question entirely. But someone who is looking at the examiner's mouth, who is also listening, is better poised to grab the message in the question than someone who is trying to avoid eye contact with the examiner. And I don't know why people do that. Well, naturally, we have different ways of interacting. Some people naturally do not like making eye contact, which is not a problem in the IELTS, because you're not going to get scores, extra scores for making eye contact or not making eye contact. But what it does is that it improves or it boosts your own confidence, and it allows you to make a much more solid connection with the person that you're communicating with. So even if you cannot make eye contact for the whole of the 15 minutes or 14 minutes that the test is going to take, try as much as possible to at least 3 to 4 times during the course of the test, look up and ensure that you make eye contact with the examiner, or that you study the examiner's countenance or visage to be able to decipher the information that the examiner is trying to pass across to you easily. The final tip, which is actually tip number 11, and supposed to be like an extra tip, is be confident. Be confident. Be confident. Confidence is not overrated. Confidence cannot be overemphasized. If you've seen all the questions for the speaking test, prior to the day of the test. You've seen the questions, you've crammed all the answers, and you get into that speaking test and you're fidgeting. I can assure you that you will not be able to give out the information that you know, that you've already crammed. And even if you do give out that information, you still will not get good scores because it will affect your delivery. Remember, in the IELTS, the content is not the challenge. The content is not our focus. It is the delivery. It is the words. It is the how you express it that is our focus. So even if I know all the right answers and I know all the important, intelligent, high-sounding, brainy facts that I can use to answer the questions and my delivery is shaky, I still fail. Confidence is king in the IELTS speaking test. You need a healthy dose of confidence, which is why I always round up my speaking sessions by saying that before the day of the speaking test or when you are stepping into that speaking hall, find your happy place. Find your happy place. Find your happy place. Confidence would allow you to give answers that are essentially wrong, that you know are wrong, that you know you have little or no information about, with such poise, with such panache, that the examiner would be forced to say, well, even if he was saying rubbish, at least he said the rubbish in a very nice way. They sell the rubbish in a convincing manner. I wish you all the best in the IELTS, and please stay tuned to our channel and subscribe to our channel to get more information like this that you need to boost your chances of success in the IELTS and also fast track your immigration process through writing the IELTS just once, and that's a guarantee that we always give, just once, using our tips and ensuring that you get the best scores applicable in the test. Should I come your way? Once again, my name is Lanre Yusuf, and I'm your anchor for the IELTS multi-step program.